If NVIDIA disappeared tomorrow, markets would panic. But in the year 2072, almost nobody would. Not because NVIDIA failed, but because it became invisible. In that future, nobody asks what GPU runs their system. Nobody benchmarks frames per second. Nobody debates compute per watt. Those questions feel antique. Instead, people ask something else. What models can I access right now? What cognitive services am I subscribed to? What can I run, simulate, predict, or optimize on demand? Hardware did not vanish. It sank beneath software, and the company that once lived and died by silicon transformed into something far more powerful than a chip maker. It did not become just a cloud provider. It did not become just an AI company. It became an infrastructure layer for cognition itself. That transformation did not happen because NVIDIA built slightly faster graphics processing units. It happened because the world hit a wall. In the decades of the 2020s and the 2030s, power meant silicon. The fastest graphics processing unit trained the fastest model. The fastest model produced the best product. The best product dominated the market. The value pyramid started with chips and climbed towards services. But the foundation was always hardware. NVIDIA sat at the base of that pyramid, and it felt unshakable. Then scale broke the system. Demand for artificial intelligence exploded across industries. Language models, vision systems, robotic stacks, simulation engines, predictive tools for finance, medicine, logistics, and energy. Every company wanted models. Every government wanted capability. Every startup wanted access to compute. But supply chains tightened. Energy grids hit ceilings. Export controls hardened. Data centers became geopolitical assets. You could not simply build infinite clusters or summon limitless power. For the first time, hardware alone was not enough. The world did not need faster chips. It needed smarter distribution. That pressure forced a quiet pivot. NVIDIA had always built software around its hardware. CUDA had been the gravitational field that kept developers orbiting its ecosystem. But as the constraints tightened, the higher layers became more important than the silicon underneath. Optimization frameworks squeezed more performance from the same watt. Inference engines reduced latency without new hardware. Orchestration systems routed workloads based on energy availability, cooling constraints, and regional regulation. Simulation libraries allowed companies to test ideas virtually instead of burning real-world resources. Efficiency became strategy. Companies began to internalize a simple truth. If you control the software layer, you steer the hardware. And if you steer the hardware, you shape the economics of the entire stack. This was the first inversion. For decades, software had served hardware. Now hardware served software. The second inversion came when the initial wave of generative hype faded. Enterprises stopped chasing spectacle and started demanding usefulness. They did not want impressive demos. They wanted reliable outcomes. Cybersecurity systems that responded autonomously. Supply chains that forecasted disruption before it happened. Medical scans analyzed in seconds. Energy grids balanced in real time. Legal documents parsed without human bottlenecks. The question shifted from which GPU is fastest to what problem can this system solve. At that moment, managing clusters became a burden. Updating drivers became friction. Training models from scratch felt inefficient for most organizations. Businesses did not want to own AI infrastructure. They wanted to consume intelligence the way they consumed electricity, reliably, on demand, and without thinking about the machinery behind it. NVIDIA saw that shift and leaned into it. What began as developer tooling slowly evolved into a platform. Developers trained models on NVIDIA's stack. They optimized them with NVIDIA's libraries. And they distributed them through NVIDIA-controlled channels. Enterprises acquired those models, fine-tuned them with proprietary data, and deployed them into workflows without touching the underlying hardware. From the outside, it resembled cloud computing. But inside, it was something broader. NVIDIA controlled the loop. Training environments, optimization pipelines, distribution layers, versioning systems, security patches, and inference routing. The company was no longer selling performance, it was selling access, and access scales differently than hardware. As the years moved forward, model architecture evolved under constraint. Large monolithic networks gave way to modular systems. Models were distilled, quantized, compressed, and decomposed into specialized components. Instead of one giant neural network doing everything, ecosystems of smaller models collaborated through shared protocols. This reduced power requirements and increased flexibility. Someone had to compile, schedule, secure, and route those modular systems. NVIDIA built the pipes. It did not need to own every model. It needed to own the pathways through which models flowed. It became the universal translator between hardware, software, and application. The layer that decided where workloads ran, how they were prioritized, and how resources were allocated across regions and industries. Then another shift arrived, one that made latency existential. Neural interfaces matured. Augmented reality moved from novelty to necessity. AI systems became embedded in decision-critical environments: hospitals, transportation networks, energy distribution, defense systems, and financial clearinghouses. Delays were no longer inconvenient, they were dangerous. Inference could not simply sit in distant data centers. It had to exist at the edge, in local clusters, in embedded accelerators. It had to move seamlessly between locations without breaking continuity of experience. Intelligence became something that followed the user, not something the user connected to. NVIDIA responded by building networks that behaved less like server farms and more like energy grids. Workloads were prioritized based on urgency. Emergency capacity was reserved for critical systems. Baseline demand was balanced across regions. Opportunistic tasks filled the gaps. Compute was allocated the way utilities allocate electricity, with awareness of scarcity, reliability, and safety. At that point, NVIDIA was not a chip company. It was a cognitive broker. By the decade leading up to the year 2072, the identity shift was complete. NVIDIA was no longer defined by hardware releases or benchmark charts. It was defined by throughput of cognition. The company's mission was not performance in isolation, but the smooth metabolism of digital thought across society. Users rarely saw any of this. They interacted with seamless systems, glasses that translated speech instantly, assistants that planned schedules, budgets, and travel routes, industrial overlays that revealed structural weaknesses in buildings, agricultural platforms that predicted crop yields with uncanny accuracy, financial tools that modeled systemic risk in real time. Intelligence ran at the edge, in the cloud, and within microaccelerators embedded in everyday objects. The world became a market for cognition, and NVIDIA ran the marketplace. Teenagers in the year 2072 find it strange that people once purchased graphics cards for personal ownership. Buying hardware feels as archaic as paying per text message. What matters is access to models, access to inference capacity, access to augmentation, access to simulation environments that allow entire cities to be tested virtually before concrete is poured. Hardware still exists. It is simply no longer the focal point. It lives beneath software, and software lives beneath human intent. Looking back, historians describe the transformation not as a corporate pivot, but as an architectural evolution. In the 20th century, infrastructure meant energy. In the early 21st, it meant networks. Then it meant data, then compute. NVIDIA began life in that compute layer. It climbed into orchestration. It expanded into distribution. And eventually, it anchored itself in cognitive infrastructure. At that layer, the metrics changed. No one cared about frames per second or floating point operations. The meaningful measurements became task completion, latency of intent, systemic resilience, and societal productivity. NVIDIA did not win by building the fastest chip forever. It won by ensuring that thought could move frictionlessly through machines. What began as a company selling GPUs transformed into stewardship over the digital metabolism of civilization. Not through ideology, not through political ambition, but through layered control over architecture. And if the world of the year 2072 teaches us anything, it is this. People rarely remember the hardware. They remember what it allowed them to become.